I'm going to create a Lambda function here for you that's going to render a custom panel in the call log here, kind of like this super one here. This one actually is pretty neat because it actually can look up the weather for you based on a zip code you provide. So let me just rehash how I created the super panel in the call log. So the nice thing is if you're in the phone and you open up that panel, it would typically go full screen like this. So actually there's a couple things about the coloring of it and the theme. So why don't I go in there and we'll just edit this and make it look nicer. So let's go back over here to super page. And let's customize what this thing is doing. So jumping right into the code here, let's make that font size a little bigger. Okay, and let's also just make sure we have we can run that. All right. So the first thing is all of these functions are going to start with a handler function. I guess actually before I go full screen, this first line here, including require mustache, that's possible because I can actually add another package down here. So we have a whole library of packages that we've included. So if there's like a specific one that you want and you don't see in the list, just let us know and we can probably get that added for you. Okay, so the first thing about the Lambda handler function is that, let's jump to the end of it now, is that it's going to yield to the context variable. So context is passed into the handler function as the second argument. And once we, when we're ready, we're going to yield control back to context by calling done. First parameter is going to be null, which indicates there's no error. And then the last parameter is going to be this response body, or this response object. And the response body has a status code. In this case, we want to make sure we say 200. It has a content type as well. In this case, it's text HTML. We also want some script to run with our HTML. So we separate out in the response the body, which is the HTML content, and then or like a template, and the script, which is the logic that we actually want that to run on the client side. So this is where we're kind of doing something a little bit clever. What we're doing is we're defining a variable here called CTX, which you could think of as like context. And it's an object, and in this case it has a call, and the call is actually going to be serialized activity record. So we're going to serialize the activity record as JSON. Now this activity variable, if we go back up to the beginning of this function, remember activity came in through the event. So when you first receive the call, event comes in with an activity record, and so we're assigning that to the variable here. So when we come back down here, what you're seeing is we're then passing into the JavaScript here a context variable, right, serialized. Then we get to this line here, and what we're doing is we're taking a JavaScript function script up here, and we defined this as an anonymous script, and we called toString on it. Then down here, we're wrapping it with parentheses, and we're calling it. So the script is actually being invoked here. So context is defined, and then script is executed. So that's pretty cool. So that means that now we can define some markup. We can, in that markup, right, it's being rendered on the server, we can inject variables into that markup, which, and we can also use mustache library that we required, and we can do things like loop in our template over information, or we can inject information into the template using mustache. So, we have ES6 here, templates, so we could have just done variables like this, but we could also use a library. So in this case, we're using a library to conditionally include the zip code if the activity actually has a postal code. So right away, you know, there's going to be a bug, because that means sometimes when you open this, you'll just see label and you won't see an input box. So yeah. So let's look at the, you know, seeing the template here, and then let's look back at it over here. So you can see how, you know, there's the zip code input box, there's the name. So we know this is rendered into the template as a string here, and then this input box is rendered onto the page conditionally based on the mustache template evaluating that. So it's kind of neat. And then of course, when the user clicks the button, this button here, the submit button, which submits the form, we have a handler obviously registered there, because, you know, 95033, yeah, should be going out and getting the weather. Maybe. Click it again. So that should be submitting the form. Oh, I clicked the wrong button. That's why. Yeah, so that's clicking the form there and getting us the weather. Yeah, so that's that. So let's look at, I guess let's hide this button that doesn't do anything right now, because that's confusing. And let's go up and look at what the client-side code is running now. So the client-side, then that template loads, which has a form in it. And here we're going to use just DOM get element by ID and get the form. We're going to attach the submit event handler to it, and then on submit we're going to invoke. So this is where it gets kind of interesting. So there is a variable that is exposed to the client-side JavaScript called CTM. The other thing to keep in mind that's interesting is that this is all like JavaScript that's being evaluated on the server, but it's being serialized on the server. So while it's being evaluated for syntax correctness and things like that, it's effectively being compiled on the server, so you know that by the time it gets to the client, it's valid JavaScript, which is kind of a cool side effect of the way we're doing this. So then now, you know, we can have some client-side variables like CTM, where we're going to invoke, and what we're doing here is we're actually invoking another Lambda function. So this Lambda function, though, which, let me jump over to that one, is actually a server-side only Lambda function. So it's different. It's not going to actually render. So when it calls context.done, it's just, you know, it's basically just data, and the data can be in any format you want. But the main thing that this one is doing is it's making an HTTP request out to the Open Weather Map API, which is just a convenient, easy to use open, you know, API. So then now what that means is then this response here is actually the response that we're passing into the context in this other Lambda function here, the payload that we're passing into this other Lambda function. So then the client side just has to interpret those results, which in this case, results are have a data which has an array that has points to more data that then we output into HTML. So that's pretty cool. And of course, there's that transfer button, which this actually would work, but it requires the call to be currently live, which perhaps a better way to do this would have been to say, okay, here's our activity as a context. One of the things we could do is when this page renders, we could say is call live, and we define this variable as activity dot dial status equals in progress, or maybe it's ringing. Actually, let's do just do status in progress. So then now we have a new mustache variable that we can go like, and we'll save that. Wait for that to save, then we can just go ahead and run our test here. See that the code ran, nothing broke, so that's great. Now over here, we have a couple options. We could just, you know, refresh the browser page and this would reload. But I think an easier way to do it is actually just to cause the code to do it itself. So we'll just click on flow, and then we'll click on super. And now it's reevaluating that code. So you notice the button for transferring is gone, and now we just have our lookup action. pretty cool. So yeah, so I hope this helps you, because the other thing we could have done in here, like I think you wanted a link in here. We could have done target equals blank, href google.com or something, right? Search for it, right? And then again over here, click there, and we have our target equals blank, search for it. Cool. All right, well, I hope that was helpful, and